Good afternoon, everybody. How's everyone doing? Everyone full of burgers and tacos, I hope. Welcome to RTFM. My name is Rachelle Noel. I work for Jamf. I am a sales engineer. And I'm a bit of a stickler for good documentation. And it's actually probably, I don't know, it's a bad thing to have, but also a good thing to be passionate about something. And normally I was speaking to someone and I was thinking about, what my session is going to be about. I was like, documentation. Everyone I spoke to was like, yeah, of course. We all need good documentation, right? Regardless of what industry we're in, vertical, what have you. Things need to be documented. So for my session today, we're going to be dealing with that concept of what good content looks like, how it can actually work as being a security asset, how we can control versions and protect our data that we're so meticulously documenting, from onboarding, securing, preventing those bad actors trying to get into our systems, and also, be remiss of me not to include AI, right? This is the world we live in. So, as I say, today's session is clicking. RTFM. There we go. Got there again. But don't worry. It's read the fantastic manual. We have to be, keep it clean on a Thursday afternoon. So let's start with a quick poll. So hands up, who has an employee handbook in their organisation? Not as many as I would have hoped. Okay, right, fair enough. Who has an intranet? More? Okay, great. Okay, this one, there might be even less hands. Who has up-to-date workflow documentation? One. Okay. And who's heard this phrase? This isn't technically how you do it, but it's kind of how we do it. Yeah. And one of my biggest bugbears is like, well, if it's technically not how you do it, then why are we doing it? Maybe a neurodivergent thing, I'm not too sure. And how we can actually sort of deal with this, I was sort of like scouring the internet and I was looking for something profound to say. So the faintest ink is better than the strongest memory. Okay? If we write it down, we're more likely to remember what we have to do. But on top of that, if we can update it, making sure that that content is actually conveyed in a way where people read the fantastic manual. There's no point having documentation if people don't read it. So, what does that look like? Let's start with what bad is. Always good to start at the very bottom. Let's level set, right? So, 47%, for a few studies, 47% of employees found that their company's digital organization was not easy to use, they couldn't find anything, and it was poorly managed. That's like nearly 50%. That's nearly 1 in 2 of the whole organization, right? That's pretty bad. So we also found Gen Zers, the new workforce that's coming up, 30% of them said that they would probably look for other employment if they didn't have good digital documentation. They can't actually, find something to help them do their job. And then 3 and 4 say that actually poor digital organization majorly affects how they can be productive. We all go to work, we all want to do a good job, we always want to be efficient as possible, right? We want to be keeping it transparent and productive. And to one of your points that probably got the least amount of hands is that 1 in 4 say that the company never conducts a digital cleanup. So there's probably the spurious documentation on their intranet that's probably not been touched in probably about 5-10 years. Not great. So we can kind of see what that impact looks like for the actual employees. But what's kind of the real life story? What can that poor documentation failure to do so, how can that affect companies on a wider level? So I was doing some research, and I found Exactis. I was like, never heard of them. Me neither. However, they were a merger aggregation company. And what they did, they had, I think it was 340 million people's worth of data was publicly exposed. They didn't have any documentation of what that protocol looks like, how they can handle documentation. That's people's addresses, even pets. Even the pets didn't even get away with it, right? And it only came about because they had an audit. So luckily they did. And we don't know where this information is coming from, but it's the best, documented, a pretty good data set that we can actually, if you're of that ilk, if you want to be sort of mining it, it was publicly available. You just needed probably Elasticsearch or something like that. Now, as I say, Exactis, bit of a random one, but have we heard of Equifax? Probably. It's one of the top 3 credit reporting agencies. Now, back in 2017, 163 million people's data was breached. And that included age, credit card numbers, social security numbers in the US, right? That's the key into benefits, into taxes, into wages. Now, they did things well. I won't slag them off, right? They did things great. They had monthly meetings where they would discuss vulnerabilities in the application toolset that they had. Great. We love to have monthly meetings. Attendance wasn't mandatory. Not great, right? They didn't keep any meeting notes. So in April, I found out that an application was vulnerable. In May, can I remember what that app was? Nope. And then we have another problem. It transpires that only one person knew about a specific application. Information silos and hoarding. We'll get to that later. Now with this, it's a case, well, that one person who knew about an application that actually had a vulnerability wasn't invited to those meetings. So not only we weren't keeping meeting notes, we weren't documenting protocols or workflows, he didn't even know that such a vulnerability existed. Right? So we can kind of see how a simple thing like writing down what happened in a meeting can lead to quite a big number. 1.3 billion, yes, with a B, 1.3 billion worth of fines. So that's from the FTC, which is like the regulatory organization. There was US states that actually fined the company as well. And also employees. So the chief executive, the CSO, the CIO all resigned. And when we're talking about the ramifications of a simple thing like a documentation, it is obviously how it impacts the employee, but also how it can impact the reputation of the brand name, of how you are within your industry and your vertical, how you're respected, can you be trusted? And it was a dark day when I was doing this research, right? I actually kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole and found there was a plethora of other data breaches. This is just a snapshot of that was like, oh, those are big numbers, let me put them in. But we're kind of seeing how these were all as a result of poor documentation internally, that therefore they weren't documenting what those workflows and procedures are. If it's not written down, again, faintest ink. We need to make sure it's written down somewhere so it can be a valid reference point. So we kind of understood the end user, the employees effect of poor documentation, what possible effect it could be on the actual company itself. But what does good documentation look like? This clicker is not clicking. There we go. So good documentation should empower users, ensure consistency, reduce security risks, improve user retention, and increase engagement and efficiency. So that's all great, right? We kind of know we're level setting. We're poor, the good. How do we get there? Now, through this session, you'll probably see me doing quite a lot of things where I am working smarter, not harder. So for those of you who do know Jamf, we actually have this, this graphic for our trusted access message and how our, Jamf as a platform can help you manage and secure your devices. And as I was looking, I was like, this is spot on. This actually goes through all the things I want to cover and is quite good little pillars of how we can get good documentation and how we can enforce it. So I worked smarter and not harder, and I borrowed it, shall we say? And just whipped off trusted access and put RTFM. So with that in mind, we will start at the very beginning. Always a good place to start, I always say. Enrollment. So we have our new users, right? They're onboarding. They might have been at a previous company that are probably similar, but regardless, they're coming into your environment, and they might need to know how we get to good. What's the requirements? What's needed of me? And that can start with a documentation timeline. So I see this being very, very useful. When we have a new starter joining the company, that initial onboarding is crucial. We have generic things like pensions, contracts, terms of conditions, all these things that every user gets. But then we can drill down in those kind of role-specific documentation of more technical, right? What HR is very going to be different to DevOps. So what do you need to know to really hit the ground running? And it could be something as simple as creating a new hire checklist. Very, very easy. Everyone gets it. We can kind of see what the status looks like. We actually have a, in our self-service, we actually have our employee handbook. This video. So, when we're kind of doing that onboarding process, it could be actually deploying that to the end users. They've done that zero touch. We're starting with a nice journey, and all of their documentation can be available, terms and conditions, employee handbook, so they're good to go. And this is great because what this actually can do is help get that whole unified onboarding experience. We're level setting. Everyone can kind of see, right, what's actually expected of me. And that can affect, compliance. When I started, everyone had to do like these compliance trainings where every 6 months, that 6 months comes around pretty quick. But going through, trading secrets, insider trading, all these sorts of things. So having ways to sort of make that experience so we know that everyone is starting at the same level. But how can we make that a little bit easier? We can look at automations. So, making it smarter, not harder. And what automations can we use? So it could be something as simple as like maybe an onboarding email. So new starters started, they automatically get an email that then breaks out to where their pension lives. Maybe you have different regions that then have different requirements. We can kind of build in that automation. Now, internally at Jamf, we use Confluence, and I can actually subscribe to a sales engineering space. Anytime anything changes in there, I'm like, oh, I get a notification. That's great. Or maybe I want to sort of see what the new product, maybe I can then decide, is this something I need to act upon? Do I need some testing? Do I just need to bookmark it for, some weekend reading? That's how spicy my life is. You can, sometimes when it's automatically going to be notifying the end user, it's just, you can't see the wood for the trees. So having that opt-in element for the end user to say, actually, this is important to me, they're more likely to actually take notice, and you're automating that whole process to make things really easy. Now, when I first started at Jamf, this might sort of be a few flashbacks for people, this is what our documentation looked like. And it was very version specific. So my role is to talk to customers, partners, and sort of say, hey, this is how you do something, and I love to follow up with documentation. And you're kind of having conversations, and it's like, well, Rachelle, I've kind of followed the document, and it's not taking me where I need to go. I was like, what are you actually looking at? And realizing they're probably looking at something from Casper, like way down the road that haven't been supported, probably been deprecating them. They couldn't get to where they needed to be. So we literally weren't on the same page. And in a relative recent time, we actually moved to a different model. So our learn.jamf.com, we have everything that's kind of live. Now with that, you have that source of truth. So whatever the latest version is available is presented to the end users. We don't have any sort of like spurious versions just lying around. Now, obviously, if the end user hasn't actually updated their instance, in this example, they still have the options to look at the previous documentation. Version control is important. We all need to be on the same page. And if we can do these things where we can actually automate it, and it makes our life a lot easier. Now, what I would suggest people to do is actually look at what their tool stack is. Do a bit of an audit. Are there integrations that can be available? Because if there are, it's like, okay, what will be beneficial? Just because you can integrate it doesn't mean you should. You know, just because it looks a little bit shiny, it might be a waste of time because you actually might not be that useful. So being able to inform the end user of any changes. There's no point changing documentation and keeping it up to date if actually the end user doesn't know that something's changed. Now, this one I think is probably the most important one, secure. Now, security can mean different things to different people. So how can we ensure that, you know, putting documentation, getting it together, be it internal or external, that we're actually protecting our critical data? First of all, we need to decide whether it's going to be public or private. Is it going to be publicly facing? Is it going to maybe help our customers? Or is it going to be internal on our intranet? So at the University of Minnesota, which is where our headquarters is based, they actually do a bit of a hybrid model. So publicly facing, they actually sort of, you know, document pro in general and you know, how they can help their end user and their admins to kind of get there. But also what they do is they have gated material. So they've actually got a link to their Jamf Pro instance, and quite wisely, you need to have credentials to get in, right? So we can see what that balance looks like. And by that, we're actually looking at access controls to ensure that our organization stays compliant to protect our IP. Now that can actually mean, you know, we can maybe look at ZTNA as a solution. Making sure that authorized users on secure devices that are managed can access our corporate resources. Right? If anyone knows anything, Marcus laughed because that's literally our trusted access message, so I'm like weaving it in a little bit. But you know, we can ensure that our end users are following protocols to gain access into corporate resources, be it Confluence. And then further on from that, we can look at role-based access. So we've got them in, but we can then see only certain users can get access to certain documentation. Maybe there's some product development that's happening. Just the people in that team need to have access. Everyone else in the organization can't. So we can like lock it down even further. So we're looking at publicly facing documentation, private, confidential, maybe restricted. We can really sort of utilize other resources like MFA, SSO, you know, all those acronyms that I'm throwing at you, right, to kind of like look at how we can control who can see what we've taken that time to document. So tools like Confluence, obviously. We have Google Docs. I even found out that Notion has like an enterprise plan, which I was like shocked. I like a bit of Notion. Am I just too far away? There we go. So we need to make sure that we're securing our documentation. We're limiting exposure to phishing attacks, you know, to ransomware, to making our critical data and repositories open source. So we don't want to be like Exactis, because they did not have any access controls, I can tell you. But we can make sure that we can centralize those documentation. We're using that role-based access to ensure that those who want to collaborate and can collaborate can do it without the risk of having some version issues, but also that their data will be exposed as well. And I like to call this prevention, but also retention. When we are looking at the documentation sphere, it's also, we're securing it, we're making sure that we're making inroads into automating it, but we're also looking at how we can help our employees be better. An informed employee set can help the organization grow. So I used to actually manage a team of 35 people, and they had various degrees of knowledge base, and it was quite tricky to manage. So you had junior, mid-level, sort of senior. So understanding and doing a bit of a skills analysis of seeing where we're at, level setting, saying, okay, right, where do you want to go, that kind of career progression, sort of teamwork, those sort of soft skills. But also what I like to do is have more of a technical specific document. I just threw this together. Obviously, I've got some very fun named employees in my team. But on the get-go, I can break out into the documentation that I've written. I can then also see the proficiencies of my team. And I can say maybe, Joe blogs, his CRM skills ain't that great. But Jane Doe, she's pretty on it. So maybe I could do a bit of a mentoring scheme. And from an individual level, I can then give them the option to do some self-learning. So it breaks down to that documentation. It shows me as a manager where I want to push them or where they need to focus. They have the ability to write notes, and they can sort of do that self-learning in their own time. But more importantly, other. Giving your employees the ability to comment and feedback. And this is what we call the feedback loop. So we've probably all had a version of a feedback loop, asking for feedback, giving it, and then nothing happens. More of like a feedback dead end. But what we actually need to do to see a feedback loop in its utopian world is ask the question, collect the data, analyze the data. That analysis part is really key because sometimes people just like to give feedback. There's those keyboard warriors out there who kind of just want to give the opportunity. If you give them the opportunity to say something, they will. So being able to actually analyze that, implement those changes if necessary, and then we use our automations to notify. So I used to work at a company, and we were doing some testing with some products, and there was documentation. So I was like, huzzah, we've made it. And I probably should have tweaked that it said 2017, but it didn't really cross my mind. Anyway, I kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole with that, and I was pulling my hair out. I was like, why is this script not working? It looked a little bit dodgy, but I couldn't really tell what it needed to happen. So crying under the desk for a period of time. I pulled myself back together, talked to my colleague, and I was like, oh, have you got this to work? And he was like, oh yeah, I spoke to the product owner, and I told them their script was wrong. I gave them the right one. Oh, we had that analysis and implementation failed, right? And put me out for imposter syndrome kicked in. I was out of sorts for a few days, right? Because information was gathered, but it wasn't implemented, therefore it wasn't added into the documentation, and therefore as a user I wasn't notified. So I just thought that was the source of truth. So when we're looking at that prevention and retention, it's about actually harnessing your employees, understanding that they're probably the best people to give you feedback because they're the people utilizing that tool on a daily. And when we're looking at, maybe there's some disgruntled people, we saw those Gen Zers who were probably thinking, actually, I'm going to look for another job because my documentation is not great at my company. Now, to actually go through that hiring process, if anyone's been through it, it can be quite long-winded to find a good candidate, up to potentially 3 months to find someone. Then they have to hand in their notice period. Then the whole onboarding process as well, that takes probably another 3 months just to kind of get that going. So we need to make sure that we're enabling, engaging, and encouraging our employees to ensure that we can then help facilitate a safer working environment. A knowledgeable team is a good team and a sturdy team, and they will actually sort of help build the company from within. Come on. Smooth. So we've identified the processes that kind of need documenting, onboarding, getting that feedback through. But who's responsible? And to this I say, everybody. If you have something that you've said, oh, actually, is there a document for this? No. How about writing it? Maybe becoming an SME in it because you're taking the time to go through the process and break it down. And if you're not, then you've also got the ability to feedback. So regardless of whether you're owning that documentation or just feeding back, you're still part of that creation. So we kind of understood what needs documenting, but we need to think about the how. So the three key components: templates, workflow visualizations, but also understanding dependencies. So welcome to the basic template. Covers a lot of things, right? Can be operations, HR, what have you. Very, very streamlined. And, how we look at templates is we're standardizing how we can convey a message. Now, with this, we can then look at workflow processes. So very, very straightforward. Right? An order creation, we're doing invoices, payment, order complete. But on top of that, we're looking at a lot more dependencies. There could be waiting for something else to trigger something else to trigger something else, right? So understanding what that workflow looks like before you start documenting can be pretty handy, because we don't want to be reliant on some information that's not linked. Maybe you're looking at an old version and be sad. So what can that really look like? So, real life. I'm looking at building out a documentation for my help desk to sort of look at permissions and what that ideal flow of setting up users within my Jamf Pro instance. Now from that, I can then take my template and build that out, because I know what that flow looks like, I know what needs to be covered. But also, I need to be aware of my dependencies. So I'm actually breaking out into additional documentation, so I need to make sure that I'm aware that those are then live and current, so we're not getting our little sadness 404. Now, all of this means that democratization of information means that we don't have information silos and hoarders. They are the worst, let me tell you. I used to work at a company, I was just out of university. As you can tell, I've got lots of stories to tell. I used to work at a company, and there was this network infrastructure manager, and he'd been with the company from day zero. He was like employee number 3. And I asked him for some advice. I was like, I'm doing some testing. I know you're busy, but do you have this written down just so I can do some testing internally? No, Rachelle. Let's call him Bob. Ooh. Come on, Bob. Bob? Bob? Bob. There we go. Oh, Bob. Still causing me grief right now, right? 20 years later. So, asking Bob if he has any sort of documentation for me. I got a quick shake of the head. No, Rachelle, I did not do any documentation. I was like, okay, breathe, internalize that rage. Okay, right, can I ask you why? Well, I don't want to be fired, do I? Why do you think you're going to be fired? Well, if I'm the only one that knows how we do something internally, I'm less likely to be fired, aren't I? Okay, right. Well, 6 months later, Bob left. We were up a creek because he was with the company for 15 years. All those incremental changes he didn't document. And if we know anything about networks, unpicking things can lead to a lot of pain. So don't be Bob. Do not be Bob. If that's anything you take away, don't be Bob, right? Because we need to make sure that we're preventing those rogue IT, and they're kind of like, oh, we're just going to, technically this isn't how you do it, but this is how we do it, kind of rogue solutions. Because that knowledge democratization is another security benefit for documentation. Not having it like with Equifax, when that one person knew about that application and didn't know about the vulnerability $1.3 billion later. So what we also need to do is think about implementing those templates and how they can actually streamline the deployment of knowledge to the end users. So it's by creating an effective and efficient workforce. Ensuring that they're engaged, that they know what they need to do, is kept up to date. They don't have to knock on Bob's door because that door will never open. And one thing to really focus on is, we've understood how, but we also need to know, what's best suited. There's a plethora of ways to communicate a message. A how-to guide, step-by-step, a video, an infographic. At Jamf, we actually have our own YouTube channel. We've got a few, where we have shorts, concise, bite-sized information, digestible. We also even have our simulations. So we're actually helping the end users. It's kind of like they've got a virtual SE with them. Now, by no means am I saying that you need to go through and build out YouTube channels or do these simulations. We love to document at Jamf, which can be a blessing and a curse. But it gives you examples of the best way to convey a message. I'm quite a visual learner. So if I get like a block of text, I'm done for. It's like, okay, right. Writing tools and summarize has been my best friend, but we'll get to that in a second. So also understanding your learners, giving them the ability to say, okay, right, I'm not going to go any lower than a 12-point font because I'll be squinting for the rest of the day. But maybe you have a branding color scheme. Don't let that drive the message. I work with someone who's colorblind, so therefore that's kind of redundant, right? So if we're relying on that. Also, if we're looking at creating videos, making sure that there's closed captions, maybe some audio content as well, some transcripts, so we can engage all users. Because when it comes to accessibility, by putting these things in place, it's actually helping everybody. It's not just helping the person who is suffering from disability, right? Because it's making that information easier to access. That well-honed message that's clear and concise. So, when we're looking at that, it's including everyone, and there's better retention. I told you it was coming. The future is AI, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your stance, the future is now. There's a lot of people have a lot of things to say about AI. And I think when it comes to the uptake in AI, when it comes to documentation, it's definitely weighing things up, and it's a bit of a balance. So it could be like, AI can help me with a consistent message, but then maybe I might be lacking that human touch. Or it could be that over-reliance. I speak to people, and ChatGPT is the first thing they go to. It's like, oh, right, we don't want to do any Googling or reading anything. Or they could be maybe a little bit like me, and I'm a bit reluctant to kind of dip my toe in there. So there's all factors that need to be considered when it comes to dealing with documentation and utilizing AI in the workplace. Bob, he's back. Image Playground, Apple Intelligence. I put the most Gollum-looking guy I could find. It's like hoarding as much information as he could. I think I nailed it with that one. Or I actually do some recording. So I actually recorded something about our remote assist functionality within Jamf Pro. And with that, I actually use a tool called Screen Studio. In there, I have the ability, through that one recording where I'm doing a voiceover, I can then do captions. I can increase the size, thinking about accessibility. I can also export an audio file. I can also export a transcript. So these are where we can utilize these tools to really harness those assets. I can even take that exported QuickTime, MP4, put it to maybe Whack Whisper, do that transcript. Then, if we look at the template that we created, I can then format from that transcript into the template of a step-by-step guide of how to use Remote Assist. So we can really sort of harness that way where I can do one thing and get multiple assets. So screen recording, audio file, a transcript, therefore a template, I can maybe curate a Confluence page or a blog post where I'm embedding that video or embedding that audio. Then I can then pop that on Confluence, restrict it to maybe a certain member of my team, utilizing those access controls. It's all kind of coming full circle. Now, when it comes to documentation, there's probably quite a lot that we can do. Most things need to be documented, right? And as the Field of Dreams said, if you build it, they will come. Question mark. But if you build it, then essentially it can be a case, well, I've written a document, it's there, go at it. But if we're trying to look at how we can document a plethora of information about our organization and workflows, it can probably maybe get a little bit overload. As I say, at Jamf, we do a lot of documentations in a lot of different flavors. But trying to find and maybe trawl through our documentation might take a bit of work. So you can look at maybe LLMs, large language models. So they might have maybe some security issues when it comes to what information we're putting there, so if it's safe and secure. Is it actually informing that model? So you might actually want to look at a RAG model, a retrieval augmented generation. Too many teeth in my mouth, I usually trip over it, but I got there. So essentially what that means is if we think about LLMs, it's someone who has read all of those encyclopedias. If you're probably as old as me, you probably have a whole library at home, they're all written out, they've memorized it, they know what it's about. Where we're talking about a RAG model, they've probably done the same thing, but they've been given the opportunity they can actually Google as well to see what the most up-to-date version is of that query. So what does that mean? It's essentially asking a question. We can then curate where we're looking for that information, be it a Wikipedia, be it intranet. Rather than looking at everything, we can then hone in on specific data sets, and then we can actually come back with a natural language answer that can help the end user. So we can weigh things up. There are pros and cons like there are of everything. So understanding them, what that can help you, but having that more reduced data, so if we're talking about internal documentation, helping the end users find that data quicker to then get their needed answers can be really, really beneficial. Internally, we are doing something similar. So coming into product, we have our AI assistant, where the admin can ask a question. It will then look at our learn.jamf. It will look at our Jamf Nation, our JNUC sessions, our blog posts. We have a lot of documentation, as said, even some Apple-specific documentation as well, and give an answer back to the admin. Coming into product later on, we will then be able to sort of take that. So maybe you want to ask, how do I make a smart group? Gives you the documentation. Make smart group. Okay, easy as that. So that's how we can we're moving forward with this utilization of AI internally. So today we covered a lot. I appreciate that. Hopefully there's something you can sort of take away that's a bit of a nugget of information. Access controls, I think, is one of the key things. Also, document as you go. It's the worst thing where it's like, okay, today I have to document 10 things to go through, trawling through your brain and having to sort of write things down, do recordings, etc. Document as you go. And if we're talking about documentation, we need to also be aware Cyber Essentials Plus, NIST 2 directive. It all relies on documentation of workflows and procedures. So if we've just built that into the way that we work anyway, then we're actually sort of helping ourselves get to that compliance. And making sure that we are looking at what good documentation can do. By ensuring that documentation exists, it's conveyed in a clear and concise manner. With access controls, we're securing it. We're utilizing maybe some integrations internally. It's simple to consume by your employee or your customer base. And then, if it's there, as I say, people will be more inclined and eagerly waiting to read that fantastic manual. Now, there's a few things that I kind of pulled together. There's some resources, it gives you some templates, what accessibility guidelines are available, and just some breakouts and some best practices and some top tips if you're so inclined. Check out the resources. And with that, I say thank you and good night. 51 seconds to go, so any questions? You got 45 seconds now. Clear as day, love it. That's how most of my calls end. No questions, because, crystal. Perfect, amazing. That's all.